Eid Mubarak, but nothing for Christians this year, apart from a reference to him attending the royal Maundy service.
Assalamu alaikum. Ramadan Mubarak. Ladies and gentlemen, as Muslims across the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth begin preparations to celebrate Eid after fasting for the holy month of Ramadan,
there are moments in the life of the British monarchy that stop you cold. Moments that make even the most loyal royal watchers sit back and ask themselves, is this really happening? Is the King of England, the Supreme Governor of the Church of England, the defender of the faith, really doing this? Because what has just come out of Buckingham Palace is not just controversial. It is not just eyebrow-raising. It is, depending on where you stand, either a quiet revolution or an outright betrayal of the institution King Charles swore to uphold. And once you hear the full story, the full picture, you are going to have serious questions. Questions that deserve serious answers. We have been tracking this story very closely here at British Stand. Just in our last video, we broke down the bombshell revelation that King Charles had privately advised against and raised concerns about Prime Minister Keir Starmer's appointment of Lord Mandelson, a king wading into political waters that already had people talking. But barely had the dust settled on that story when an entirely new, and some would argue far more explosive, announcement came crashing through the news cycle. And this one cuts deeper. This one touches not just Charles the politician. This one touches Charles the man who was crowned before God, who placed his hand on the Bible, who was anointed with holy oil at his coronation and promised to defend the Christian faith of this nation. So ask yourself this: what kind of king skips Easter? The announcement that changed everything. Let's lay out exactly what happened. Buckingham Palace has officially confirmed that King Charles will not be issuing an Easter message this year. No address, no video, no statement of faith, nothing. In a year where the Church of England is fighting for relevance, in a year where Christians across the Commonwealth are facing unprecedented persecution, in a year where the spiritual role of the monarchy has never been more scrutinized, King Charles has gone silent on Easter. Now you might be thinking, is this really that big a deal? Can't a king skip one message? Maybe he's tired. Maybe he's unwell. Maybe the palace has a scheduling conflict. And those would all be reasonable explanations if, and this is a critical if, this were happening in a vacuum. But it is not happening in a vacuum. Because here is what makes this not just a missed message, but a statement in itself. King Charles does not skip Ramadan.
Assalamu alaikum. Ramadan Mubarak.
Not once, not ever.
As Muslims across the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth observe the beginning of the holiest of months in the Islamic calendar,
year after year, without fail, King Charles records a warm, heartfelt video message to Britain's Muslim community. He addresses them directly. He uses Arabic greetings. He speaks of his affection and his solidarity. He hosted an iftar, a Ramadan breaking of the fast dinner, at Windsor Castle. Windsor Castle, one of the most iconic symbols of the British Christian monarchy on earth, transformed for a single evening into the backdrop for an Islamic religious celebration. And there he stood, beaming, proud, welcoming. Compare that to Easter Sunday, the holiest day in the Christian calendar, the day that underpins the entire faith that the British monarchy was built upon. The day that the Church of England, of which Charles is the supreme governor, exists to celebrate. And the palace says nothing, issues no message, provides no leadership, no warmth, no visibility, just silence. Does that not strike you as extraordinary? Does that not demand an explanation? The role he swore to uphold. To fully understand why this announcement is so seismic, you need to understand what the role of the monarch actually means in relation to the Church of England. This is not ceremonial fluff. This is constitutional reality. The British monarch is the supreme governor of the Church of England. That title was established under Henry VIII, codified through centuries of law, reaffirmed at every single coronation. The monarch does not merely attend church on Christmas and Easter as a cultural habit. The monarch is, constitutionally, legally, spiritually, the head of that institution. Bishops are appointed through a process that involves the crown. The Church's relationship to the state runs through the monarch. At his coronation in May 2023, a coronation watched by hundreds of millions of people around the world, King Charles made explicit vows. He was asked before God, before the Archbishop of Canterbury, before his people, "Will you to the utmost of your power maintain the laws of God and the true profession of the gospel? Will you to the utmost of your power maintain in the United Kingdom the Protestant Reformed religion established by law?" And Charles answered, "All this I promise to do." He was anointed, he was crowned, he was given the orb and scepter, symbols rooted in Christian tradition going back over 1,000 years. The entire ceremony was a Christian ceremony. The Archbishop said to him, "Receive this orb set under the cross, and remember that the whole world is subject to the power and empire of Christ our Redeemer." That is the weight of the role. That is what he signed up for. And now, in the same year he hosted Ramadan celebrations at Windsor, he cannot find the time to issue a single Easter message to the Christian people he swore before God to serve. You tell me, how do you square that circle? A pattern, not an anomaly. Here is where this story gets more troubling. Because if this were a one-off, a single slip, a scheduling mistake, an oversight, you could let it go. You could chalk it up to poor planning or royal bureaucracy. But this is not a one-off. This is part of a pattern that goes back years and which critics have been raising their voices about for some time now. King Charles, long before he was king, when he was still Prince of Wales, made it known that he wanted to be seen as a defender not just of the Christian faith, but of faith in general. He spoke openly about wanting the monarchy to reflect the diversity of modern Britain. Admirable in spirit, perhaps. But the execution has been deeply uneven, because the warmth that pours out of Charles toward Islam, genuine, effusive, consistent, is simply not matched when it comes to Christianity. It's not even close. Think about what has happened in Nigeria in recent years. The mass killings of Christians by extremist groups have been among the most horrifying religious persecution stories of the decade. Entire villages, churches burned, families slaughtered. The scale of it has drawn condemnation from human rights organizations worldwide. Where was the king's voice on that? Where was his heartfelt video message expressing solidarity with those Christian communities? Where was the Windsor Castle event in their honor? Silence. Or think about the broader experience of Christians in parts of the Middle East and North Africa. Communities that trace their roots back to the earliest days of the faith, now facing displacement, violence, and extinction. Where is the king's public solidarity with them? Because if you search for it with the same energy that his Ramadan messages arrive every single spring, you will search for a very long time. Critics, including some who are not partisan, who do not have an axe to grind, have noted this imbalance and found it disturbing. Some of Trump's closest political allies in the United States have reportedly taken to referring to Charles as a kind of Muslim monarch, not as a factual description, but as a shorthand for what they see as a troubling tilt in his priorities. Whether you agree with that characterization or not, the fact that it is being said at all by senior figures in allied Western governments tells you that this is not a fringe concern. People are noticing. And now this Easter announcement, or rather the absence of one, lands right in the middle of all of it. You cannot look at this in isolation. The context is everything. The coronation promise versus the present reality. Let's go back to that coronation for a moment, because it is worth dwelling on. When King Charles was crowned, the ceremony included something called the Coronation Oath. It is one of the most solemn commitments a human being can make. It was made in front of a global audience in a sacred building with the Archbishop of Canterbury administering the vows. One of those vows was specifically about protecting and maintaining the Church of England, not vaguely supporting faith, not generically promoting interfaith harmony, specifically the Church of England. The Protestant Reformed religion established by law. That is not ambiguous. That is not open to interpretation. It is precise, and it is legally embedded in British constitutional tradition. Now ask yourself this: if you made a solemn vow before God and your entire nation to protect and champion a specific institution, and then 2 years later, you couldn't be bothered to issue a message on that institution's most important annual celebration, what would people say about you? What would they say about your vow? What would they say about your character? Some observers have been more forgiving, arguing that the king has health concerns, his cancer diagnosis is public knowledge, and that perhaps his reduced schedule reflects medical necessity rather than theological preference. And that is a fair point. But here is the counter to it. If his health allows him to appear publicly, to carry out engagements, to attend events, then his health is not the reason for skipping Easter. If Ramadan messages can be recorded, edited, and released year after year with warmth and consistency, then an Easter message is no more taxing. It requires exactly the same level of effort. This is not about his health, this is about his choices, and his choices reveal his priorities. What this means for the Church of England. The implications of this extend well beyond the palace gates. The Church of England is in crisis. Attendance has been declining for decades. The institution struggles with relevance, with unity, with its own internal debates over doctrine and direction. It needs leadership. It needs a figurehead who champions it, who gives it visibility, who reminds the British public and the Commonwealth that this faith, this tradition, this spiritual heritage matters. The monarch is supposed to be that figurehead. In the absence of strong political champions for the established church, the monarchy has historically been the cultural anchor that keeps the Church of England connected to national life. Think of Queen Elizabeth II. Whatever you thought of her personally or politically, she was visibly, consistently, authentically Christian. Her Christmas broadcasts were saturated in faith.
For Christians, Jesus is the light of the world. But we can't celebrate his birth today in quite the usual way.
She spoke openly about her personal relationship with God. She attended church with genuine devotion. She was the defender of the faith in deed as much as title. Charles is something different. And the church is watching. The bishops are watching. The millions of practicing Christians in this country, and the tens of millions in the Commonwealth, are watching. And what they are seeing, year on year, is a monarch who seems more energized by interfaith outreach than by the faith he is sworn to defend. Some will say that's modern, progressive, inclusive. Fine. But there is a difference between being inclusive and being neglectful. A doctor who treats everyone equally is admirable. A doctor who turns up every single time one patient needs help but keeps canceling on another patient is not practicing equality. They are practicing preference. And preference, when it comes from the Supreme Governor of the Church of England, matters enormously. The public reaction. The response to this announcement has been swift and, in many quarters, furious. Social media has been ablaze with comments from across the political and religious spectrum. Christians who describe themselves as lifelong monarchists have expressed genuine hurt and bewilderment. Commentators who rarely wade into royal affairs have felt compelled to speak up. The story has spread rapidly across platforms, precisely because it touches something raw. The sense that a fundamental principle is being abandoned. And the questions people are asking are not unreasonable ones. Why would a king who recorded warm video greetings for Ramadan decide that Easter does not deserve the same? Who advises the king on these decisions? Is this a palace communication failure, or a deliberate strategic choice? If it is deliberate, what message is it intended to send? And if it is accidental, if nobody in the palace thought to flag this, then what does that say about the priorities of the institution? These are not the questions of conspiracy theorists or hate-mongers. These are the questions of ordinary people trying to understand the behavior of their head of state and head of church. They deserve honest answers, because there is something deeply unsettling about a monarchy that feels the need to demonstrate its multiculturalism by elevating one faith's celebrations while appearing to downgrade another's. That is not balance. That is not inclusion. That is not what the coronation oath describes. Real inclusion does not require the diminishment of your own foundation. You can honor Ramadan and honor Easter with equal enthusiasm. The calendar allows it. The institution demands it. The oath requires it. Defenders of the silence. Now, to be balanced here, and we always try to be, there are those who will defend the palace's decision. They will argue that in an increasingly secular public sphere, the monarch should be careful not to be seen as endorsing one religion over others. They will suggest that a Christian monarch making loud Easter proclamations might alienate Muslim, Hindu, Sikh, Jewish, or non-religious subjects. They will frame the silence as sensitivity rather than indifference. But that argument collapses the moment you examine it honestly, because the same logic would apply to Ramadan messages. If the king is trying to avoid religious partisanship, then he should be equally measured across all faiths, or equally warm across all faiths. You cannot apply a doctrine of restraint selectively. Restraint only toward Christianity while enthusiasm flows freely toward Islam is not neutrality. It is a choice, a clear, visible, documentable choice. And it is a choice that, whatever its intention, sends a message, not just to British Christians, but to Christians across the 56 nations of the Commonwealth who look to the British monarch as a symbolic head of the Christian faith that underpins much of their cultural and constitutional heritage. What does it say to them? What does the silence of Windsor communicate to a Nigerian Christian community that has buried its dead this year? What does it say to a Ugandan churchgoer or a Jamaican pastor who tuned in for a royal Easter message and found nothing? These are the questions the palace has not answered, and the longer the silence continues, the louder those questions become. The bigger picture. Who is King Charles? Ultimately, this Easter announcement, or rather non-announcement, forces us to confront a larger and more uncomfortable question. Who exactly is King Charles? What does he stand for? What does the reign of Charles III actually represent? His mother's reign was defined by stability, consistency, and an unambiguous commitment to Christian faith and British tradition. You always knew where you stood with Queen Elizabeth. Her values were legible, her faith was genuine, her sense of duty was total. She was not perfect, no monarch is, but she was comprehensible. People felt they understood her. Charles is far more opaque. He is intellectually curious, genuinely interested in ecology and architecture and interfaith dialogue. He is a more complex figure. But complexity, when it manifests as inconsistency in the execution of your most solemn constitutional duties, is not a virtue. It is a liability. The coronation was supposed to be a reset, a new chapter, a demonstration that Charles had grown into the role he had waited a lifetime to assume, and in some ways, he has carried out the duties of king with diligence. He has toured. He has met with heads of state. He has kept the institutional machinery moving. But on the question of faith, the most fundamental constitutional pillar of his role, the record is troubling. You do not get to pick and choose which parts of the defender of the faith role you want to fulfill. You do not get to show up for Ramadan and disappear for Easter. The oath does not have an opt-out clause. The coronation was not a menu from which you select the items you find palatable. Either you are the supreme governor of the Church of England, truly, fully, faithfully, or you are not. And right now, an awful lot of people are starting to ask whether Charles really believes he is. What needs to happen now? So, where does this go from here? What should happen next? At minimum, the palace owes the public an explanation, not a PR statement full of carefully crafted non-answers. An actual explanation. Why was no Easter message issued? Is this a one-year decision or a new approach? If it is a new approach, what is the rationale? If it is a one-year exception, what were the circumstances? Beyond that, King Charles needs to take a serious look at the optics of his reign and what they communicate. Because perception matters enormously in a constitutional monarchy. The crown operates on legitimacy, and legitimacy is built from trust, from consistency, from the sense that the person wearing the crown understands what it represents and takes that representation seriously. There are millions of Christians in this country who feel, rightly or wrongly, that their king does not see them the way their queen did. That their faith, their traditions, their holy days are a lower priority than his interfaith ambitions. Whether or not that feeling reflects the full reality of Charles's intentions, the fact that it exists, widespread, vocal, and growing, is a failure of royal communication and royal leadership that the palace cannot continue to ignore. Because at the end of the day, this is not really about one missed Easter message. It is about what that missing message symbolizes. It is about whether the promises made at a coronation mean something, or whether they are just theater. It is about whether the most senior Christian in the country actually stands up for his faith when it matters. It is about whether King Charles is willing to be the defender of the faith, not just in title, but in practice. Those are not small questions. They are the questions that will define his legacy. And right now, the answer from Buckingham Palace is silence. Make of that what you will. Final thoughts. The King of England will not issue an Easter message this year. That is confirmed. That is real. And when you put it next to everything else, the Ramadan messages, the Windsor Iftar, the silence on Christian persecution, the pattern that critics have been documenting for years, it becomes something that cannot simply be dismissed. Is King Charles abandoning his constitutional role as defender of the faith? Is he deliberately downgrading the Church of England's visibility in favor of a multicultural repositioning of the monarchy? Or is something else going on? Something the palace has simply not bothered to explain to the millions of people who have a right to know. We want to hear from you. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Do you think the king was wrong to skip the Easter message? Do you think the comparison to his Ramadan messaging is fair? And do you think this is a one-off or part of something bigger? Let us know. This community always brings the best perspectives to these conversations. And if you found this video valuable, if it made you think, if it gave you information you hadn't seen anywhere else, please do hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss a story. Because here at British Stand, we are going to keep asking the questions that others are afraid to ask. We are going to keep holding the institution to account. And we are going to keep doing it for you. A monarchy at a crossroads. Let's talk about the longer arc of history here, because context matters enormously. The British monarchy did not arrive at its current constitutional arrangement by accident. It was forged through centuries of conflict, reformation, and political struggle. The very reason the monarch holds the title Supreme Governor of the Church of England is because of the English Reformation, a seismic rupture from Rome that defined Britain's national identity for centuries. Men and women died for this faith. Entire political settlements were built around it. The relationship between the Crown and the Church of England is not a casual arrangement that any monarch can quietly renegotiate. It is constitutional bedrock. And that is why what is happening now, under Charles III, feels so jarring to historians and churchgoers alike. Because it is not simply that he skipped a message. It is that he appears to be slowly, quietly, perhaps unconsciously, detaching the monarchy from the Christian tradition that created it. And if that detachment continues, if Easter becomes an optional observance rather than a royal obligation. The constitutional implications are significant. The cultural implications are enormous. And the message it sends to Britain's Christian majority and to the global Christian community that looks to the British crown is devastating. How many times can the Supreme Governor of the Church of England sidestep his most fundamental duty before someone in a position of authority says, "Enough?" What Queen Elizabeth would have done. It is impossible to discuss this moment without invoking Queen Elizabeth II. Not to be maudlin, not to engage in nostalgic mythology, but because the contrast is so stark and so instructive. Queen Elizabeth understood her role as defender of the faith not as a title, but as a calling. She spoke about her Christian faith with directness and genuine emotion that was rare for any public figure, let alone a head of state. Her Christmas broadcasts, which she personally worked on and took enormous pride in, consistently wove together national events, personal reflection, and explicit Christian faith. She referenced the teachings of Jesus by name. She spoke of prayer as a personal practice. She attended church not because the cameras were there, but because she believed. And critically, she did this consistently, year after year, for 70 years. She did not pick and choose. She did not send warm messages to one religious community while going silent for another's most sacred celebration. She was the defender of the faith, and she showed up for that role every single time it was required. Now, Queen Elizabeth also valued interfaith dialogue. She received leaders of all the major world religions. She respected and acknowledged the diversity of belief within her realm. But she did so from the foundation of her own clear, unwavering Christian identity. She never left anyone wondering what she believed or whether she would show up for the Church of England. The question simply never arose. That is the standard Charles inherited. That is the standard against which his choices will inevitably be measured. And on this Easter, the comparison is not flattering. The Commonwealth dimension. Here is a dimension of this story that receives far too little attention. When people discuss King Charles and the Church of England, they often frame it in purely British terms, as a domestic political and cultural debate. But the implications stretch across the globe. The Commonwealth of Nations includes 56 countries. Across those nations, there are hundreds of millions of Christians. In many of those countries, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, the Caribbean, and the Pacific, the monarchy carries genuine symbolic and spiritual significance. The British monarch is not just a foreign dignitary to these communities. The crown is woven into their constitutional and cultural history. The relationship between those nations and the British monarchy is complicated, yes, marked by the legacy of colonialism, but it is real, and it persists. And across many of these Commonwealth nations, Christians face extraordinary challenges. In Nigeria, as we mentioned, the scale of violence against Christian communities has been catastrophic. In parts of East Africa and the Middle East, ancient Christian communities are under existential pressure. The voice of the British monarch, as defender of the faith, as symbolic head of a global Christian heritage, could mean something in those contexts. Not as a political intervention, but as a pastoral one. As a signal that the faith is being defended, that the community is seen, that the head of the institution cares. That signal, on Easter Sunday, did not come this year, and in communities that were looking for it, that needed it, the silence will have been heard. How many people across the Commonwealth checked official channels hoping for an Easter word from their king, and found nothing? That is not an oversight. That is a pastoral failure on a global scale. A personal reflection. There are moments covering stories like this when you wonder if you are overreacting. Am I reading too much into a palace scheduling decision? But then you go back to the facts. You look at the Ramadan messages, warm and personal and annual. You look at the Windsor iftar. You look at the silence on Easter. You look at the absence of any royal voice on the persecution of Christians worldwide, and you realize, no, you are not overreacting. You are reacting appropriately to something that genuinely matters. The precedents we set today become the norms of tomorrow. And if the norm being established is that the Supreme Governor of the Church of England can quietly skip Easter while maintaining enthusiastic religious observance for other faiths, then we have crossed a constitutional and cultural threshold that will be very difficult to walk back. This is the moment to ask hard questions. This is the moment for the Church, for Parliament, for the press, and for the British public to demand clarity about what the monarchy stands for and what it is willing to defend. Because right now, as Easter passes without a word from Windsor, the silence is deafening.